Kimberly gripped Hannah's small hand tightly as they entered the imposing courthouse. The high ceilings and stern-faced security guards did nothing to calm her nerves. She glanced down at Hannah, who seemed more interested in the echo of their footsteps than the gravity of the situation. Kimberly took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. They approached the courtroom, and the door creaked as they stepped inside. The room was filled with murmurs and the occasional cough. Kimberly's eyes immediately found the massive oak desk where Judge Callisto presided. His reputation for strictness was well known, and today she would face his judgment. Kimberly's stomach churned with anxiety. The $200 parking ticket loomed over her, a sum she simply could not afford. She felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her shoulders. Kimberly Thompson, the bailiff, called, and she stepped forward, feeling all eyes on her. Hannah, clutching her worn-out stuffed bunny, stood close by her side. The judge's gaze was as intimidating as she had imagined, piercing through the formalities of the court. "Miss Thompson, you are here regarding a $200 parking violation," Judge Walter began, his voice firm but not unkind. "How do you plead?" Kimberly swallowed hard. "Guilty, Your Honor," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But I..." Before she could continue, a small voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Hamburgers, please." The courtroom fell silent, stunned by the interruption. Kimberly's heart skipped a beat as she turned to her daughter. Hannah's innocent eyes were wide with expectation, completely unaware of the seriousness of their surroundings. Kimberly's face flushed with embarrassment. She had hoped Hannah's presence might soften the judge, but now she feared it had only made things worse. Judge Walter raised an eyebrow, but there was no anger in his expression. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, curiosity piqued. "Did you say hamburgers, young lady?" he asked, his tone surprisingly gentle. Hannah nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir, my tummy is rumbling, and Mommy didn't have time to get breakfast." A few chuckles escaped from the audience, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Kimberly's embarrassment deepened, but she could see that Hannah's honesty had at least broken the tension. Judge Walter turned his attention back to Kimberly. "Miss Thompson, would you care to explain why you believe you should not have to pay this fine?" Kimberly took a deep breath and began to speak. "Your Honor, I know I parked illegally, but I was desperate. My daughter was sick, and I needed to get her medicine. There were no other spots available, and I thought it would only take a few minutes. But the line at the pharmacy was long, and when I returned, I found the ticket." The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. Kimberly could see the audience members shifting in their seats, their initial curiosity turning into empathy. Hannah, oblivious to the gravity of her mother's words, tugged at Kimberly's sleeve. "Mummy, can we get hamburgers after this?" Kimberly forced a smile, patting her daughter's head. "We'll see, sweetie." Judge Walter cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention back to him. "Miss Thompson, thank you for your honesty. It's clear that you are doing your best under difficult circumstances. However, the law is the law. Parking in a handicapped spot is a serious offense." Kimberly's heart sank. She had hoped for some leniency, but the judge's words felt like a final nail in the coffin. She bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. Judge Walter noticed her distress and leaned forward, his gaze softening slightly. "Miss Thompson," he began, his tone more gentle. "Before I make my final decision, I'd like to understand more about your current situation. Could you tell me a bit more about yourself and your daughter?" Kimberly hesitated, glancing at Hannah, who was now playing with her worn-out stuffed bunny. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice trembling at first. Years ago, Kimberly had a different life in mind. She was full of dreams and aspirations, envisioning a future where she could provide a stable home for herself and her daughter. She had been in a relationship with Darius, a charming man who had promised her the world. They had met in college, and for a while everything seemed perfect. "Darius, we can save for our future. We need to be smart about this," Kimberly had insisted, sitting at their small kitchen table, meticulously planning their finances. Darius had nodded, his smile reassuring. "I know, babe. I've got some money saved up too. Together we'll make it work." But that was before everything fell apart. Kimberly had trusted Darius with her savings, believing they were working towards a common goal. She remembered the day she came home to find the apartment empty. The eerie silence was the first sign. She had called out for Darius, but there was no response. "Where is he?" she muttered, a sense of unease creeping over her. Then she saw it. Her savings, meticulously kept in a small box, were gone. Panic set in as she frantically searched the apartment, hoping this was some cruel joke. But reality hit hard when she found a note in his handwriting, barely legible through her tears. "I'm sorry, Kimberly. I need this more than you do. Goodbye." Her world crumbled. Darius had not only taken her money, but also left her with nothing. To make matters worse, he had run off with her younger sister, Mia. The betrayal cut deep, leaving her feeling utterly alone and devastated. Judge Walter listened intently, his expression unreadable. "That must have been incredibly difficult for you," he said quietly. Kimberly nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "It was. I had to abandon my college dreams, unable to afford tuition without my savings. I found myself working multiple low-paying jobs just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Each day was a struggle, and the future I had once dreamed of seemed farther away than ever." Hannah, oblivious to the gravity of her mother's words, tugged at Kimberly's sleeve. "Mommy, can we get hamburgers after this?" Kimberly forced a smile, patting her daughter's head. "We'll see, sweetie." Judge Walter cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention back to him. "Miss Thompson, thank you for sharing that. It helps me understand the context of your situation. Can you tell me more about your current struggles?" Kimberly took another deep breath and continued. "I work long hours at a bakery in the mornings and take shifts as a waitress at a nearby diner in the evenings. The little time I have left is spent with Hannah, helping her with homework and trying to give her a semblance of a normal childhood. It's exhausting, but I do it for her." One night, after a particularly grueling shift, Kimberly collapsed onto the couch, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. She closed her eyes, trying to gather the strength to continue. "Kimberly, you have to keep going." For Hannah, she whispered to herself, the struggle was relentless. Rent was always due, and there were always bills to pay. Every dollar was stretched thin, and the pressure was unrelenting. Despite her best efforts, it seemed like she could never get ahead. "Hannah, can you please go to bed? Mommy needs to finish some work," Kimberly said one night, trying to balance the checkbook while her daughter played nearby. "But I want you to read me a story," Hannah pleaded, her big brown eyes full of hope. Kimberly sighed, her heart aching. "Just a few more minutes, sweetie, I promise." Back in the courtroom, Judge Walter nodded, absorbing every word. "I see. You've been through a lot, Miss Thompson. It's clear you're doing everything you can to provide for your daughter under very difficult circumstances." He paused, looking at Hannah, who was now quietly drawing on a piece of scrap paper she had found in Kimberly's purse. As the judge signaled for a recess, Kimberly guided Hannah to a nearby bench. She wrapped her arm around her daughter, drawing strength from her presence. Judge Walter watched them for a moment, then leaned over to the bailiff. "Can we get some food in here for the little girl? Maybe some sandwiches and juice?" The bailiff nodded and quietly left the courtroom. Judge Walter sighed, leaning back in his chair. He had seen many cases over the years, but Kimberly's story touched him in a way few others had. He decided he needed a moment to reflect before making his final decision. Kimberly tried to keep her spirits up as Hannah chattered happily about her drawing. Despite the serious setting, Hannah's innocence was a small beacon of hope. Soon the bailiff returned with a tray of food. Hannah's eyes lit up, and she looked up at her mother for permission. "Go ahead, sweetie," Kimberly said softly, smiling despite the tension she felt. "Thank you, mister," Hannah said, looking up at the bailiff, who smiled and nodded. As Hannah munched on her sandwich, Judge Walter observed the scene, thinking about the challenges Kimberly had described. He was moved by her resilience and Hannah's honesty. When the courtroom reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted slightly, the tension eased by the brief break. "Miss Thompson, please approach the bench," Judge Walter called out. Kimberly stood, her heart pounding, and walked back to her place. "I've had the chance to review your case and consider the context you've provided," he began. "It's clear that you are facing difficult circumstances and doing your best to provide for your daughter." Kimberly held her breath, waiting for the verdict. I see you have a clean driving record and no prior offenses. Given these factors and the situation you described, I am dismissing the parking ticket." Kimberly exhaled, feeling a rush of relief. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. The judge nodded. "But that's not all. Your story has highlighted a deeper issue that I believe needs addressing. I would like to look further into your case, particularly regarding the betrayal you faced from your ex-boyfriend, Darius." Kimberly's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean, Your Honor?" Judge Walter leaned forward, his expression serious. "I intend to contact the authorities to investigate Darius and the theft of your savings. If we can bring him to justice, it could provide you some closure and possibly restitution." Kimberly was stunned. She had never expected such an offer. I don't know what to say. Just say you'll cooperate with the investigation. This is about getting you the justice you deserve," the judge replied firmly. Later, as Kimberly sat with Hannah on the courthouse steps, the weight of the day's events settled over her. The dismissal of the ticket was a huge relief, but the prospect of reopening the wounds of her past with an investigation into Darius left her feeling conflicted. "Mommy, are we going to get hamburgers now?" Hannah asked, her voice bright and hopeful. Kimberly looked down at her daughter, the reason she kept fighting. "Yes, sweetie, we're going to get those hamburgers." Over the next few days, Judge Walter made good on his promise. He contacted the local authorities and provided them with the details Kimberly had shared in court. Intrigued by the case, the investigators began to look into Darius's whereabouts and his actions. Judge Walter sat in his office, sifting through a stack of documents. The more he read, the more his frustration grew. He couldn't believe the extent of Darius's betrayal. The investigation revealed that Darius and Kimberly's sister, Mia, were living a lavish lifestyle, flaunting the stolen money. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. He picked up the phone and dialed the lead investigator's number. "Detective Harris, this is Judge Walter. I've reviewed the findings on Darius and Mia. It's time we take legal action. This injustice cannot stand." Later that day, Kimberly received a call from Judge Walter. Her heart raced as she listened. "Miss Thompson, we've discovered that Darius and your sister are living off the money they stole from you. The authorities are moving forward with the investigation to bring them to justice," the judge explained. Kimberly felt a mix of relief and anger. "Thank you, Your Honor. I can't believe they did this to me. It's not just about the money, Miss Thompson. It's about ensuring they face the consequences of their actions. And to support you, I've arranged for some resources to help you get back on your feet." A few days later, Kimberly met with a social worker named Mrs. Jenkins at the local community center. Mrs. Jenkins handed her a folder filled with information on job training programs, childcare assistance, and online degree opportunities. "Kimberly, these programs can help you build a better future for you and Hannah," Mrs. Jenkins said warmly. Kimberly nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Thank you. This means a lot to me." Meanwhile, Darius and Mia's world began to crumble. The police had frozen their accounts and seized their assets. One evening, Darius received a knock on the door. He opened it to find 2 police officers standing there. "Darius Collins, you're under arrest for theft and fraud," one of the officers announced. Darius's face turned pale. "This is a mistake. You can't do this." Lisa appeared in the hallway, her eyes wide with fear. "What's going on, Darius?" Back in court, Kimberly faced Judge Walter again. This time, the atmosphere was different. She felt more hopeful, knowing that justice was being served. "Miss Thompson," Judge Walter began, "I want you to know that the legal proceedings against Darius and Lisa are underway. They will face the consequences of their actions." Kimberly nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor. I can't tell you how much this means to me." The judge smiled kindly. Days turned into weeks, and Kimberly began to see positive changes. She enrolled in a job training program and started taking online classes. Hannah, sensing her mother's renewed optimism, seemed happier too. One evening, Kimberly sat at the kitchen table studying for her online course. Hannah was coloring nearby, humming a tune. "Mommy, are we going to be okay now?" Hannah asked, looking up with innocent eyes. Kimberly smiled, reaching out to stroke her daughter's hair. "Yes, sweetie, we're going to be just fine. Things are finally looking up." Judge Walter watched Kimberly's progress from a distance, feeling a sense of satisfaction. He had seen many cases over the years, but this one reminded him of the importance of empathy and justice working hand in hand. As he sat in his office, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He vowed to continue his work with the same compassion and determination, knowing that the law was not just about rules, but about making a real difference in people's lives. The investigation against Darius and Mia continued, with mounting evidence ensuring they would be held accountable for their actions. Meanwhile, Kimberly's life began to stabilize. She found a new sense of purpose and strength, determined to create a better future for herself and Hannah. The day of the court proceedings finally arrived. Kimberly stood outside the courthouse, her heart pounding. She had faced many challenges, but this one felt different. Today she would confront Darius and Mia and seek justice for the betrayal that had upended her life. "Mommy, are you okay?" Hannah asked, her small hand gripping Kimberly's tightly. Kimberly forced a smile. "Yes, sweetie, Mommy's just a little nervous." As they entered the courtroom, Kimberly's eyes met Darius's for the first time in years. He looked different, older, worn out. Mia stood beside him, her face a mix of defiance and fear. The room buzzed with tension as everyone took their seats. "Darius Collins, you are charged with theft and fraud," the prosecutor began. "The evidence gathered against you is overwhelming. You used the stolen money to fund a lavish lifestyle, showing no regard for the victim, Kimberly Thompson." Darius's lawyer stood up, his voice confident. "My client pleads not guilty. We intend to prove that these accusations are baseless and that there is more to this story than meets the eye." Kimberly's hands clenched into fists. She couldn't believe the audacity, but she had to stay strong for Hannah and for herself. When it was Kimberly's turn to testify, she walked to the stand with her head held high. The prosecutor guided her through the questions, and she recounted the betrayal with a calm, clear voice. "Darius and I were in a relationship," Kimberly began. "We had plans for our future, and I trusted him with my savings. But when I found out I was pregnant, everything changed. He left, taking my money and running off with my sister." She paused, glancing at Darius. "He didn't just steal money. He stole my dreams and left me to raise our child alone." The courtroom was silent as Kimberly's words hung in the air. The prosecutor nodded, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, Kimberly Thompson's testimony is corroborated by the financial records and evidence we have presented." Darius's lawyer stood again, ready to cross-examine. "Miss Thompson, isn't it true that you and Darius had financial disagreements before he left? Could it be that he felt pressured and made a desperate decision?" Kimberly's eyes flashed with anger. "Pressure? Desperate? That doesn't justify stealing and abandoning your pregnant partner. He made a choice to betray me." As the trial continued, the community's support for Kimberly became evident. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard her story showed up in court, offering emotional and moral support. They held signs outside the courthouse, some reading "Justice for Kimberly" and "Stand with Kimberly." During a recess, Kimberly stepped outside for some fresh air. She was overwhelmed by the show of solidarity. "Miss Thompson, we're here for you," a woman said, handing her a bottle of water. "Your strength is inspiring." "Thank you," Kimberly replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you how much this means to me." Inside the courtroom, Darius's defense crumbled as more evidence was presented. Bank statements, luxury purchases, and testimonies from witnesses painted a clear picture of his deceit. Mia, too, was implicated, her role in the scheme undeniable. The prosecutor delivered a powerful closing argument. Darius Collins took advantage of Kimberly Thompson's trust and used her money to fund his extravagant lifestyle. He showed no remorse, and his actions have caused irreparable harm. We urge the court to hold him accountable. Judge Walter looked sternly at Darius and Mia. "The evidence is clear. You both committed serious offenses, and your actions have deeply affected Miss Thompson's life. It is the court's duty to ensure justice is served." As the judge announced the verdict, guilty on all counts, Kimberly felt a wave of relief. The nightmare was finally over. Darius and Mia would face the consequences of their actions. After the trial, Kimberly stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by supporters. Hannah clung to her side, looking up at her mother with pride. "Mommy, we did it," Hannah said, her voice full of wonder. "Yes, sweetie," Kimberly replied, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We did." The community support didn't end with the trial. They continued to rally around Kimberly, helping her rebuild her life. Judge Walter's commitment to providing resources paid off, and Kimberly found herself with new opportunities and a brighter future. As she walked away from the courthouse, hand in hand with Hannah, Kimberly knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was long, but she was no longer walking it alone. She had her daughter, her community, and a newfound strength that would carry her forward. As she walked away from the courthouse, hand in hand with Hannah, Kimberly knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was long, but she was no longer walking it alone. She had her daughter, her community, and a newfound strength that would carry her forward. Months passed, and Kimberly threw herself into her online degree program with a determination she hadn't felt in years. The nights were long and the coursework challenging, but she persevered. Hannah, ever the supportive daughter, would often sit beside her, coloring or reading, as Kimberly studied late into the night. "Mummy, are you going to be a teacher now?" Hannah asked one evening, looking up from her picture book. Kimberly smiled, pausing to ruffle her daughter's hair. "Not quite, sweetie. I'm studying to get a degree in business management. It'll help me get a better job." True to her word, Kimberly's hard work began to pay off. She excelled in her courses, often receiving top marks and praise from her professors. Her dedication caught the eye of a local business owner, Mrs. Jenkins, who had heard about Kimberly's story through the community grapevine. One afternoon, Kimberly received an unexpected call. "Miss Thompson, this is Mrs. Jenkins. I own Jenkins Consulting here in town. I've been following your progress, and I think you'd be a perfect fit for a new position we're creating. How about you come in for an interview?" Kimberly was stunned. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. I'd love to come in and talk about it." The interview went better than Kimberly could have hoped. Mrs. Jenkins was impressed by Kimberly's resilience and her academic achievements. By the end of the meeting, she offered Kimberly a position as a project coordinator, a role that came with a substantial salary increase and benefits. As she left the office, Kimberly felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on solid ground. With her financial situation improving, Kimberly found herself with a bit more time and resources. She remembered the support she had received from the community during her darkest times and felt a strong urge to give back. Kimberly started volunteering at the local community center, focusing on helping single mothers who were struggling just like she had been. She organized workshops on budgeting, job searching, and balancing work and childcare. Her sessions quickly became popular, and she found herself becoming a mentor and advocate for many women. One evening, after a particularly engaging workshop, a young woman named Sarah approached Kimberly. "Miss Thompson, your story is so inspiring," Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion. "I feel like there's hope for me too, thanks to you." Kimberly smiled warmly. "If I can do it, so can you, Sarah. It's all about taking one step at a time and believing in yourself." Word of Kimberly's efforts spread, and soon she was invited to speak at larger events and forums, sharing her journey and the lessons she had learned. Her voice resonated with many, and she became a well-respected advocate for single mothers in the community. One day, as Kimberly was preparing for another workshop, she received a letter in the mail. It was from Judge Walter. She opened it with curiosity, and her eyes widened as she read his words. "Dear Miss Thompson, I wanted to personally congratulate you on your achievements. Your transformation has been nothing short of remarkable, and you have become an inspiration to many, including myself. I am proud to have played a small part in your journey. Keep up the extraordinary work. Sincerely, Judge Walter." Kimberly felt tears of gratitude welling up. She had come so far from the scared, desperate woman who had stood in his courtroom. Now she was a beacon of hope and strength, helping others find their way. As the months turned into years, Kimberly continued to excel in her career and her advocacy work. Hannah thrived, her mother's achievements filling her with pride. Kimberly's life was busy, but it was filled with purpose and joy. One evening, as Kimberly and Hannah sat together looking through a scrapbook of their journey, Hannah looked up and said, "Mommy, I'm so proud of you. Kimberly hugged her daughter tightly. Thank you, Hannah. Everything I've done for us. And as they sat there bathed in the warm glow of their home, Kimberly knew that they had truly come full circle. Her transformation was complete, and their future was brighter than ever. A year later, the Thompson home was filled with the delicious aromas of Thanksgiving dinner. Kimberly and Hannah bustled around the kitchen, preparing a feast that symbolized their newfound stability and hope. The once turbulent waters of their lives had calmed, leaving a serene, promising horizon. "Mommy, do you think Judge Walter will like the pumpkin pie?" Hannah asked, her face smeared with flour. Kimberly smiled, ruffling her daughter's hair. "I'm sure he will, sweetie. He was kind enough to accept our invitation." The doorbell rang, and Hannah dashed to answer it. Standing there carrying a small bouquet of flowers was Judge Walter, his usually stern face softened with a genuine smile. "Hello, Hannah. Happy Thanksgiving," he said warmly. "Happy Thanksgiving, Judge Walter," Hannah exclaimed, leading him into the house. Kimberly greeted him with a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming, Your Honor." "Please call me Michael," he replied, setting the flowers on the table. "And thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here." The dinner table was a lively scene. Hannah chattered excitedly, recounting her school adventures and showing off her latest drawings. Kimberly and Michael exchanged stories, the conversation flowing easily despite the formal setting of their previous encounters. "Michael, I have to say, your decision to investigate Darius and Mia changed everything for us," Kimberly said, her voice steady but emotional. "I don't think we'd be here today if it weren't for your compassion." Michael nodded, looking reflective. "Kimberly, your case reminded me that the law isn't just about rules and regulations. It's about people. Your strength and resilience were a wake-up call for me." As they continued their meal, the conversation turned to Kimberly's advocacy work. "I've started a support group for single mothers," Kimberly explained. "We meet weekly, and I've been able to share resources and advice. It's been incredibly rewarding to see these women find hope and strength in their lives." Michael's eyes lit up with admiration. "That's wonderful, Kimberly. Your dedication is truly inspiring." After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Hannah insisted on showing Judge Walter her favorite board game. As they played, Kimberly and Michael talked more about their past year. "Have you seen changes in your courtroom since Kimberly's case?" Kimberly asked, curious. Michael nodded. "Yes, indeed. I've started implementing more compassionate approaches. It's about balancing justice with understanding. People need to know that the system can be fair and humane." Kimberly smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "You've made a real difference, Michael. Not just for us, but for many others." The evening winded down, and Michael prepared to leave. He turned to Kimberly and Hannah, his expression earnest. "Thank you for inviting me. This has been a reminder of why we do what we do. Your journey has made me a better judge and a better person." Kimberly hugged him, feeling the strength of their shared journey. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." As Michael stepped out into the crisp night air, he looked back at the warm light spilling from the Thompson home. The legacy of his compassion and Kimberly's resilience would continue to ripple through the community, proving that the law could indeed be both just and humane. The following week saw Kimberly's support group grow. More single mothers joined, drawn by Kimberly's story and the tangible hope she offered. She spoke at community events, sharing her journey and the importance of empathy in justice. Hannah thrived in the loving, secure environment her mother had built. She excelled in school, her creativity and confidence blossoming. One evening, as Kimberly prepared for another support group meeting, she received a letter in the mail. It was from a young mother who had attended one of her talks. "Dear Miss Thompson, your story has given me the courage to keep fighting for a better life for my children. Thank you for being a beacon of hope." Kimberly felt tears well up as she read the heartfelt words. She knew that her journey, though fraught with challenges, had led her to a place where she could truly make a difference. And as the sun set on another day, Kimberly looked around her home, filled with the laughter and love she had fought so hard to create. The future was bright, not just for her and Hannah, but for all those she had touched along the way. Hey everyone, thank you so much for sticking around until the end of this story. I really appreciate all of you who took the time to watch and listen. This story about Kimberly, Hannah, and Judge Walter has been incredibly moving, and I hope it touched you as much as it did me. What I love most about this story is the powerful reminder it gives us about the importance of living a good life filled with compassion, resilience, and faith. Kimberly's journey was far from easy. She faced betrayal, hardship, and countless obstacles, but she never gave up. She kept pushing forward, not just for herself, but for her daughter, Hannah, and that determination made all the difference. Through her perseverance and the kindness of people like Judge Walter, Kimberly's life transformed in ways she never imagined. It shows us that even when things seem darkest, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, and sometimes that light comes from unexpected places. For those of us who believe in God, Kimberly's story is a testament to the testimony that God is always by our side. When we strive to live good lives, to do right by others, and to keep faith even in tough times, blessings come our way. It might not always be immediate, and it might not always be in the form we expect, but God's grace finds us. Kimberly's life turned around because she held on to hope and kept doing her best, and in turn, she received the support and opportunities she needed to thrive. Remember, being good and kind, even when it's hard, creates ripples that spread far and wide. Judge Walter's decision to show empathy and understanding didn't just change Kimberly's life. It also changed his. It made him a better judge and a better person, and that impact will continue to spread through everyone he interacts with. So my friends, let's take this story to heart. Let's live our lives with kindness, perseverance, and faith. Let's support each other, lend a hand when we can, and never lose hope, even when the road is tough. Trust that God sees your struggles and your efforts, and in His own time, He will bless you in ways you might never expect. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's spread more stories of hope and resilience.